Hyundai really got our attention with the Ioniq 5. Before that, the Kona and the original Ioniq range were worthy, decent electrified cars, but nothing like the Ioniq 5. It grabbed our attention with its design, and we're told that people are giving up their BMWs, Mercedes and Audi to get into it. And now, the follow-up, the Hyundai Ioniq 6. The 6 shares its underpinnings with the Ioniq 5, and a lot more besides, but as you can see, it looks very different. Hyundai calls it a streamliner, and that's because the big focus is on aerodynamics. The reason being, range. It looks really distinctive too, and we'll point out some of the details in a minute, but everything you're looking at here is in the name of extending the range. The front of the Ioniq 6 is quite conventional really. It's low and smooth, so you can imagine the airflow smoothly going over it. There are a few details. You can see the flaps down here. They open and close depending on the cooling needs of the powertrain. And I think it's worth mentioning this little design motif, which you'll find everywhere in the car. It's called parametric design from Hyundai. It's little pixelated squares and cubes. Other than that, as you move back, the front is quite short, it's quite small up front, but you see the wheels are quite aerodynamic looking, and some models can get cameras instead of door mirrors. The door handles are also flush fitting. Again, everything in this car is about reducing drag through the air. However, the most distinctive part of this car, again in the name of aerodynamics, is the back. A sloping roofline leads into this almost flat rear window, and it's a bit reminiscent of the first generation Mercedes CLS for anyone that remembers it. This is a little bit different however, because you've got all these spoilers and detailing. You got this high level spoiler here, and it has this huge brake light built into it. You have a lower lip here, and then a really quite detailed diffuser at the bottom. But distracting us from all of these spoilers and aerodynamic bits and pieces are these lights. They're full width, which is all the trend at the moment, but Hyundai has gone for this LED detail that I mentioned a moment ago, and it really is very distinctive. Because of the sloping tailgate, the Ioniq 6 isn't quite as spacious in the boot as the Ioniq 5. It holds 401 litres of luggage. There is extra space under the front for charging cables. Hyundai offers the Ioniq 6 with 2 different battery sizes, 3 different power outputs up to 325 horsepower, rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and a range of up to 614 kilometres. In terms of charging, the Ioniq 6 can take a fast DC charge up to 232 kilowatts. What that means in the real world is up to 100 kilometres range added in less than 5 minutes, if you can charge at that rate. Inside at least is a nice place to be sitting if you're sitting around waiting for the car to charge. As we've become used to from Hyundai, there are 2 large screens in front of us here. They're really clear, really easy to see and really easy to use. The menu systems aren't complicated. Thankfully, there are separate controls for the climate down here, which we're very happy to see. Clutter in the centre console is kept to a minimum because the drive selector is over here on the other side of the steering wheel. You just twist it to drive or reverse. This centre console is quite high, and it probably hides the fact that this apparently is the Hyundai with the most legroom in the front. Surprising little detail there from Hyundai. What I really like in this centre console up here at the front is this wireless charger for phones. It's rubberized, so it holds the phone in place even though it's right on top of it. Next to it is a USB-A port, which these days looks a bit old-fashioned, but there are 2 USB-C ports inside in here. Underneath this level, there's a big storage area here. The console itself doesn't move like it does in the Ioniq 5, but perhaps it doesn't need to be honest. There's 2 cup holders in a very easy to access location here, and this is where the window buttons are, which is a bit unusual, but you soon get used to it, and it means that you've got this lovely, flat, smooth surface on the door itself. The materials inside are all really high quality, robust. They feel like they last a long time, but they also are nice to the touch. There are a lot of metallic little bits and pieces. The plastics are textured, and overall it feels like a high quality car. There are lots of other niceties on the interior, which I suppose the owner will discover over time. For instance, it's got really nice ambient lighting detail on the dashboard here, and that's at a lower level too. Either side of the dashboard are these unusual upright sections, and actually in the cars with camera-based mirrors, that's where the screens will go. In terms of storage, other than the cup holders and what's underneath, the glove box itself slides out like a drawer. It's much more spacious than most glove boxes. Interestingly, there are buttons on the side of the passenger seat here, which allow those in the back to move it out of the way a little bit and offer up a bit more room. Because of all this space in the front, drivers of all shapes and sizes are well catered for. And there's loads of adjustment in the driving position too. The steering wheel goes up and down, in and out, as you'd hope. And this particular car has electric adjustment, so it's very easy to tweak the driving position when you're on the move. Despite the sloping roof line, headroom in the back really isn't all that bad. I'm under 6 foot tall, admittedly, but I still have a bit of room there. I'm not going to be touching the headlining. More impressive is the legroom and the amount of room you have for your knees. This is a completely flat floor all the way across. Despite that, The seat width perhaps wouldn't encourage you to try and fit in 3 car seats. 3 adults will get in if they need to, and the outer 2 seats have plenty of space in them. There are other details that are worth looking at the back here. You've got another 2 USB-C ports there, and I love the detailing in the door here, which also comes with ambient lighting. I also noticed, really happy to see today, that the rear seats also get heating. Even in the world of electric cars, which are generally quieter and smoother anyway than in those with internal combustion engines, the Ioniq 6 is very quiet and very smooth. Did notice earlier when we were shooting the car up close, it's got double glazed side glass, and that undoubtedly helps with the silence. But regardless, it's a good thing. This car is silent, it's refined, it's lovely to drive, and that probably enhances the sense of quality, and it'll appeal to those that might be considering a Tesla or a BMW i4, for example, or the Volkswagen ID7 in the future. And this is a car that will potentially compete against all of those. And it certainly feels up to the job. When you're kind of ambling around, it's got quite good bump absorption, just moves with the road quite well. It doesn't feel heavy either, which is notable. I think a lot of electric SUVs that we've been driving feel heavy on the road. They feel big and a bit bulky. And this doesn't. This feels more lithe. It isn't much lighter, to be honest. It's just how it's been calibrated, how the steering's been calibrated, etc. But it's pleasant to drive at normal everyday speeds. The big question on everybody's lips is whether all the streamlining works, whether this is really a range champion. Well, I mentioned earlier how cold it was today, and unfortunately that will affect the range of it. We got in with a 98% battery charge, and it showed a range of 525 kilometers. That was obviously based on the previous person's driving and driving style, etc. So do we expect it to hit 614 kilometers, as is the official maximum range in the Ioniq 6? Perhaps not. You know, you probably need to drive it at slower speeds around town, not too many hills, in decently warm weather to get that. However, we do think, looking at what we're seeing today, that it will get way over 450 kilometers in most people's hands. And that is very usable indeed. This particular model we're driving is one of the 2 rear-wheel drive options. It's got a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, and 74 kilowatt hours of that is usable. Not that you need it when you're ambling around town, but the rear-mounted electric motor has 228 horsepower and 350 newton meters of torque. That is ample. It makes the Ioniq 6 pleasantly quick. It always has enough performance. But perhaps more importantly, the accelerator is well calibrated. It's never snappy. It doesn't feel like the acceleration is, out of control. It doesn't feel like it can't handle the performance. And even though it is rear drive, it just feels like it goes all the time. It's certainly in the dry, there's no problem with traction. If you want a bit more response from an accelerator, you can press the button here on the steering wheel to change into the sport mode. There are also eco, normal and snow modes depending on the conditions. The other thing that affects how it drives is brake energy regeneration, and you can alter the level with paddles behind the steering wheel here. It goes to level 3 by default, you go again, it goes to max, and it calls I-pedal on, which supposedly is one pedal driving, though I will say that it doesn't ever feel like it's complete one pedal driving where you don't ever have to touch the brakes. There are loads of active driving assistance systems built into the Ioniq 6, and actually as I'm sitting here at the junction with the indicator on, that reminds me to tell you about one of them. There are blind spot view cameras, so it projects the view into the dashboard. We've seen it already in other Kias and Hyundais, but it's worth mentioning here, and it's really, really useful. You can see whether there are cyclists come inside of the car, for instance, in traffic, things like that. It's a useful little feature. It works on the move as well, so if you're trying to change lane on the motorway, etc., the view behind is projected onto the dashboard. We've got the sport mode enabled here, and the accelerated response is notably faster. It makes the car feel much more like one that has 220 odd horsepower. It's still not a sporty car as such, but it's certainly pleasant to drive. When you put your foot down, it goes, and yet it's super silent. Sure, you can't hear any difference there in the noise through the microphone. The slight increase in wind roar there perhaps, but not at all intrusive, and at motorway speed it is serene. It's really comfortable, really quiet. Of course, all the aerodynamic work also helped with that. In this sportier mode, actually in the sport mode, if you put your foot down a little bit when you're cornering, it does make it feel a bit more rear drive than it does in the other modes. So clearly the system is calibrated that when you're in the normal mode or the eco mode, that it doesn't overpower the rear axle, should we say, and therefore it feels like quite a neutral car. And I guess Hyundai has realised that somebody who puts it into sport mode is looking for a bit more response and perhaps a little bit more driving enjoyment, and therefore it does feel a bit more rear drive, and it's quite good to drive actually. It feels a bit more something like the BMW i4 or the Tesla Model 3 that I mentioned earlier. They can both be rear wheel drive and they feel like more traditional sports saloons, and I guess this does too. It has the quality, it's really smooth and lovely, comfortable to drive when you want it to be, and then when you put it into sport mode and you find a more interesting road perhaps, it feels like a sports saloon, and there's plenty of go for that, and actually it's good to drive. So last word on efficiency in the car, really. As I said, we haven't done a big long drive in this car as yet. It's averaging about 17 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which isn't bad by any measure. Officially this car could go as low as 14 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and that is exceptional efficiency. It feels to me, given the conditions and everything, that it is possible if you're a bit of a saint. But nonetheless, it's good to know that it's capable of it. That's our first look at the Hyundai Ioniq 6. It's certainly a very interesting new electric car, and many would be happy to see this not an SUV. Whether it delivers on its range promises, we'll have to spend a bit more time in to discover, but it's certainly one that is vying for a buyer's attention. To read about the Ioniq 6 and all of its rivals, pop along to our website. It's CompleteCar.ie, and it's a great resource for finding your next new car.